The old C-119 flying boxcar groaned. It shuddered under Frank Town's grip. He wrestled the lumbering cargo plane through the turbulent skies above the Sahara. Sand lashed at the cockpit windows. It was like flying through a blinding orange sea.
We need to find a place to set down, Frank. This is getting real bad, real fast.
Lou Moran, his weathered face etched with concern, checked their position. Benghazi was still a long way off. The storm, stronger than predicted, was pushing them off course. Frank nodded grimly. He knew Lou was right, but finding a safe haven in this desolate landscape seemed like a fool's hope. The radio crackled with static. They were alone, swallowed by the heart of the storm.
I know, Lou, but where? There's nothing out here.
Frank fought to maintain control. The plane bucked and swayed, a fragile speck tossed about by the desert's fury. He could feel the sweat slick on his palms as he gripped the controls. The howling wind seemed to mock their predicament, a symphony of chaos orchestrating their doom. The passengers, a colorful mix of humanity, were strapped into their seats. They were a microcosm of life, thrown together by circumstance. Soldiers heading home, their faces etched with weariness and anticipation. Dr. Renaud, a French physician with a shock of white hair, his eyes filled with quiet concern. Heinrich Dorfmann, a German engineer, his face stoic, his gaze distant.
Hey, anyone got a deck of cards? Might as well make the best of this, right?
There were oil workers too, rough around the edges men with calloused hands and sun-weathered faces. Standish, the foreman, a giant of a man with a booming laugh that belied the tension in his eyes. Trucker Cobb, a wiry man with a nervous cough and a haunted look. Ratbags Crow, his nickname a testament to his mischievous nature, tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but nobody was really listening. Fear had a way of silencing even the most boisterous soul.
Stay calm, everyone. We will get through this.
Carlos, a young man traveling with his pregnant wife Gabriele, held her hand tightly. Her eyes were closed, her face pale. He whispered reassurances, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. They were all acutely aware of the danger. Each jolt, every unsettling groan of the aircraft amplified their fears. Then it happened. A deafening boom, a sickening lurch. The world turned upside down. Frank felt a searing pain shoot up his arm as he was thrown against the cockpit's roof. He glimpsed Lou, his face contorted in pain, before everything went black.
Lou, hold on.
He awoke to the groaning of metal and the screams of the injured. The plane had split in two, its carcass a mangled wreck amidst the dunes. Sand poured in through the shattered cockpit window. Frank, dazed and disoriented, unbuckled his harness and stumbled out. The scene that greeted him was nothing short of horrific. The fuselage was ripped open like a tin can. Some passengers were already dead, their lifeless eyes staring vacantly at the unforgiving sky. Others cried out in pain, trapped beneath twisted metal.
Hang on, I'm coming!
Frank felt a surge of adrenaline. He had to do something. He had to help. He pushed aside the pain in his arm and began to pull away debris, desperately searching for survivors. The crash had thrown them into a desperate fight for survival. The vast, unforgiving Sahara was now their prison. The survivors huddled around the wreckage, their faces etched with shock and despair. The searing desert sun beat down mercilessly. They had managed to salvage some supplies, a few gallons of water, some rations.
We must ration everything carefully. Our lives depend on it.
Panic flared. Arguments erupted. Captain Harris tried to take charge. Sergeant Watson stood by his side, scanning the horizon. Without shelter, without water, their chances of survival were slim. The desert, beautiful yet brutal, held them captive. Section 5. A desperate search for salvation. Hope flickered briefly when Captain Harris, guided by a tattered map, decided to lead a small group in search of an oasis marked on the chart. Cobb, desperate for a miracle, volunteered eagerly. He couldn't bear the thought of dying of thirst, his parched throat a constant torment. They set off at dawn, their silhouettes stark against the rising sun. Frank watched them go, a knot of anxiety twisting in his gut. He knew their chances were slim. The desert was a master of deception, its shimmering mirages promising salvation that didn't exist. Days later, a lone figure stumbled back towards the wreckage. It was Sergeant Watson. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt. He was delirious, his words a jumble of incoherent whispers.
Gone, all gone. Oasis, mirage.
Cobb, driven mad by thirst, had wandered off into the dunes, never to be seen again. The desert, unforgiving and relentless, had claimed its first victim. Their hopes, once buoyed by the possibility of rescue, sank like stones in their stomachs. Section 6. The Phoenix takes shape. Despair threatened to engulf them. But then Dorfmann, the German engineer, presented a radical idea. He proposed a seemingly impossible solution to build a new aircraft from the wreckage of the old.
We can call her the Phoenix, he said, his voice surprisingly strong, his eyes gleaming with an almost fanatical light.
The idea was audacious, bordering on insane, yet it was a beacon of hope in their increasingly desperate situation. Frank, however, was skeptical.
You're crazy. We don't have the tools, the materials, or the expertise.
He had seen the wreckage. It was a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. But Dorfmann was undeterred. He spread out a tattered notebook filled with meticulous diagrams and calculations.
We have an engine, we have wings, we have the will, he insisted. He looked at each of them, his gaze unwavering. It's our only chance. We can do this.
Section 7. A clash of wills. And so began the monumental task. The survivors, their initial skepticism giving way to a glimmer of hope, rallied around Dorfmann's vision. They worked tirelessly under the scorching sun, their hands blistered, their bodies exhausted. Frank, though still doubtful, found himself drawn into the project. He couldn't deny the logic of Dorfmann's plan, nor could he ignore the spark of determination that ignited in the eyes of the other survivors. However, the project was fraught with challenges. Materials were scarce, tools were improvised, tempers flared. Frank and Dorfmann, their personalities as different as their backgrounds, clashed repeatedly.
This is madness, Dorfmann. We need to move faster.
And risk everything. We must be precise, Frank, or we fail.
Frank, a man of action, chafed at Dorfmann's meticulous planning. Dorfmann, in turn, viewed Frank's impatience as recklessness. Their arguments became legendary, fueled by stress, exhaustion, and the ever-present knowledge that their lives depended on the success of their improbable venture. Despite the setbacks, the Phoenix began to take shape. The wreckage of the old plane slowly transformed into a symbol of hope. They scavenged every scrap of usable metal, every bolt and wire. They stretched canvas over a framework of salvaged struts, their makeshift workshop a testament to human ingenuity and the will to survive.
Tragedy struck again when Ratbag's crow, weakened by hunger and dehydration, succumbed to heatstroke. His death, a stark reminder of the fragility of their existence, cast a pall over the camp. But it also strengthened their resolve. They would not let his death be in vain.
Days turned into weeks. Hope, once a flickering ember, began to burn brighter. The Phoenix, their creation, their salvation, neared completion. It stood as a testament to their indomitable spirit, a beacon of defiance against the unforgiving desert. They had stared death in the face and refused to blink. Finally, the day arrived. The Phoenix, resplendent under the desert sun, was ready for its maiden flight. The moment of truth had arrived. Tension crackled in the air, thick as the heat that shimmered over the dunes.
Frank, his doubts momentarily forgotten, climbed into the cockpit. He went through the pre-flight checks, his heart pounding against his ribs. He met Dorfmann's gaze. For the first time since the crash, there was a flicker of understanding, of mutual respect in their eyes.
Ready when you are? Dorfmann said, his voice gruff but steady.
Frank nodded. He took a deep breath and started the engine. The propeller sputtered, coughed, then roared to life, the sound echoing across the desolate landscape like a primal scream, the sound of hope.
The takeoff was bumpy, the Phoenix struggling to gain altitude. The makeshift runway, a stretch of hard-packed sand, seemed to stretch endlessly before them, but slowly, agonizingly, the plane lifted off the ground.
A collective cheer erupted from the survivors, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief as they watched the Phoenix climb into the azure sky. Frank banked the plane, the desert falling away beneath them. He could see the wreckage of the C-119 in the distance, a stark reminder of their ordeal.
He thought of Cobb, of Ratbags, their faces etched in his memory. They hadn't made it, but their spirits soared with him now. The flight was fraught with tension. The engine coughed and sputtered. The wings, patched and reinforced, vibrated precariously. But Frank flew on, guided by instinct, by determination, and by the faint hope of a distant horizon. After what seemed like an eternity, a speck appeared on the horizon. Land. Frank's heart leaped. He banked the plane, steering it towards the coast.
As they drew closer, he could make out a small village, its whitewashed buildings gleaming in the sunlight. They circled the village once, their arrival causing a stir among the locals. Then, with a bone-jarring thud, the Phoenix touched down on a patch of open ground. The landing was rough, but they were down. They had survived.
As Frank and Dorfmann emerged from the plane, they were met with cheers. They had cheated death. They had stared into the abyss and emerged victorious. The Sahara, their prison, had become their crucible. And from the ashes of despair, they had risen, like the mythical bird that had lent its name to their improbable creation.